Welcome, everyone, to the Not Another Bucking podcast. That's right, another podcast about the Denver Broncos. My name is Nick Kosmider. I have covered the Broncos for The Athletic since the start of the 2020 season. And since that time, I've periodically had people ask me, when are you going to have a podcast? And it was one of those things where have been wanting to do it, have had perhaps a few chances here and there to do it, but wanted to do it in a way that was sort of my own and our own. And, so that's what we are doing here. We're making a podcast that we hope can be engaging for our fans. We're going to have a YouTube channel to go along with this podcast as well. We hope you guys will subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast, as well as the YouTube channel, and give us input. We want this to be a podcast that really kind of engages with you, the listeners, the subscribers on YouTube, and any other way that you reach us. And as far as the podcast itself, look, a couple episodes a week of trying to dive into topics around the Broncos, hopefully having smart analysis by a rotating cast of guests every week. That's sort of what we're shooting for. We just, want to have fun with this thing. And that'll bring us to our first guest this week. It's Nate Kreckman, host of the Kreckman and Lindahl Show, every weekday from 3 to 6 on Altitude Radio 92.5. I've known Nate since I came into this market 10 years ago. Great guy who's been covering the Broncos in his capacity as a radio host and reporter for many years. So wanted to get his input, the big picture input, as he heads into another training camp along with the rest of us. And so we'll get to Nate here in just a second. But why don't we refresh what we're going into here with training camp? The biggest storyline, of course, being, can Sean Payton, the first-year head coach who spent 15 seasons coaching the New Orleans Saints, help Russell Wilson rebound after Wilson had the worst season of his career following his trade to the Broncos in 2022? And as a reminder, let's just sort of rewind back to what Russell Wilson had to say about the partnership during OTAs in the spring.
Well, first of all, I think Sean's one of the best coaches to ever coach this game. He's intense, he's focused. He's such a great teacher of the game. And so all of us are learning every day, more information, just learning how to play the game the right way, how to practice at the highest level. And that's what we're focused on right now. And, it's an honor to obviously, put on the pads and put on the jersey and just get to do what I love to do.
Nate Kreckman, welcome to the Not Another Bucking podcast, man. Been trying to set this up for like a couple years, and I've been either too lazy or, basically the list stops there. But had to have you as my first guest, man. How you doing?
I'm good. This is weird, I have to say, because you've been my guest thousands of times by now, and now I'm your guest, so I have no idea how to behave. You'll probably never invite me over again, but we'll try this anyway.
Yeah, we'll try this anyway. I thought it was only appropriate, that we kind of switch it around a little bit, let you be kind of be the guest, have your opinions fly in here fast and heavy, and get the podcast started off the right way. But before all that, man, how this time right before training camp, it gives me major back to school type anxiety in a way that nothing really else that I've done, that I've covered does. Do you get that sense too of it's a clear delineation of all right, summer's done now?
Yeah, but also for what I do, and as somebody that does a talk show and covers every sport in town, last year the Avalanche won the Cup, and that went all the way into June, and then this year the Nuggets won the title, and that went all the way into June. And so it's weird, because in the past it was always Broncos training camp was the big thing. And in the last couple of years, and the Broncos have lived down to this, the start of training camp has kind of been the letdown. So yeah, let's hope that these guys are actually good this year, and that this thing is fun. And yeah, but I feel like summer, we got 2 weeks or something like that after the Nuggets ended, and now training camp is finally here. So it's a very different world for me. But I don't have a real job like you do.
Well, tell me about I'm always curious about how the radio part of training camp works, right? Because I tend to see you out there. You normally host the afternoon show with Andy Lindahl on Altitude, 2 to 6. Is that still your time
3 to
window?
6.
3 to 6. Okay,
chopped an hour off us.
There you go. All right. But I see you there in the morning. So how does that work? You guys kind of you have crossover? How does that work from a radio perspective at training camp?
So the answer for this year is I don't know. Okay.
Okay.
The answer, and we'll get to Sean Payton and his rules, I suppose. But in the past, it always sort of worked of, Andy and I would get out there as often as we possibly could. Again, like the focus of our day is our afternoon radio show. So, in general, like, somebody's busy one day or has something they have to commitment or whatever that morning, it's like, okay, you make sure you're at this one, I'll make sure I'm at this one. We mostly go to nearly all of them, and generally it's just to make observations and then think about that and try and synthesize those into topics and ways to be able to talk about it from 3 to 6 in the afternoon. For this year, I don't know how it's going to work. Just like I think you even have probably some questions about how this year's training camp is going to go. The OTAs that I attended were different and weird. So I'll be interested to see, once we get into training camp, exactly how this entire thing is going to go and going to operate, and what worthwhile things that we will both observe and then be able to say on the afternoon radio show. I have no idea. I also, and this is where I'm kind of a lousy guest for this particular show, I think, is that I'm now 2 decades into this thing of Broncos training camp. And one of the things, and again, I don't mean to blow up your training camp podcast, but one of the things I've come to realize is that very few things that happen in training camp actually matter for the big picture, for what we actually care about, which
Right.
is the wins and losses of the football games. Like, if you want to view every training camp practice as an event and break it down in minute detail, you could. I suppose you could. And trust me, I've done that plenty of times in my life, but I try to approach it, and quite frankly, Nick, I read all your stuff. I think you try to approach it this way too, of just like, okay, this is what happened, but what is this, and how does this actually impact what's going to happen September 10th when they play the Raiders? Like, what is actually going to be important when we get to that time, and not just, hey, this undrafted rookie out of Holy Cross is having a good looking camp, he could have a shot at making the practice squad. It doesn't matter. Okay. It just doesn't matter. And for everyone that yells at you, Rod Smith was undrafted, Terrell Davis was a 6th round pick. Yeah. Okay. Keep going. Keep naming those guys. Well, you ran out. Okay.
You're not going to run out of breath.
Chris Harris was brilliant, but we forgot 99% of these dudes. So wake me up when we get to September, unfortunately, is my jaded veteran attitude.
All right, Nate. So let's break this down in very specific detail about what
Good.
we want to see. Yeah,
Good.
No, I'm with you. I think there becomes this tendency, this pull that I think exists within this very large media core, considering the market, to jump on that, right? To have a take on every single throw, on every single thing that happens.
Right.
I think as you go longer, speaking to your experience covering it, and even mine now, I think I'm on my 5th camp. You learn a little bit how to sort of like keep that at bay, right? That sort of internal pull to like, let me tell you every single thing that happened on this day, as opposed to like, let's paint with some different strokes about how this will look in a picture come September. It's still time to find cool stories, right, about some of these guys, but I think making it bigger than what it is in that moment can be, a sort of a trap that you fall into. But you mentioned Sean Payton, and I think again, it's not going to be something we see necessarily day one, although where we stand when we get to watch these practices, that was different, as you mentioned, during OTAs and minicamp. We still don't have a good idea. I think the first practice is Friday. We're sitting here now recording this early in the week. We don't know what it's going to look like. No. But what are you most curious about just from that dynamic? We listened to the clip coming in about Russell Wilson talking very effusively about, learning from Sean Payton. That's been his desire. People in his camp said this is something that he has wanted for a long time. Is it going to be a be careful what you wish for thing? We'll find that out soon enough. But what are you most curious about as a guy who's followed Sean Payton's career from afar from a long time, kind of knows some of the stuff that comes with him? What are you just curious about as as a training camp observer when it comes to he and perhaps his relationship with Russell Wilson?
Well, when it comes to the relationship with Russ, and that to me is the biggest question mark. I think Sean Payton's a really, really good coach. He's got a lengthy track record. He's won with, yeah, again, Drew Brees mostly, but a variety of different kinds of rosters. He's a Parcells guy. He's as experienced and I think as unfazed by the moment, the spotlight, the attention, the challenges of anybody. Like, the Broncos are going to have unexpected challenges in this camp. They're going to deal with injuries that are going to pop up. There's going to be things like that. There's almost nothing you can throw at Sean Payton that he's never seen before. So that's a huge plus over any coach that they've had since Gary Kubiak has been in that spot. So that's a big change. The other thing I'm most curious about is the interpersonal workings of Russell Wilson and Sean Payton. And, Russell Wilson's purported excitement over Sean Payton being here, his admiration for Sean and the reputation, what he said about him at Pro Bowls in the past and everything else that all sounds great. But what is the coachability going to be like, not this week or next week, but, preseason games and towards the end of camp and start of the regular season? And if the offense doesn't see success immediately, then the ability to be able to stick with it and follow that plan, that to me is the biggest question mark in the meshing of the personalities. I also think, and Nick, I'd love to get your thoughts on this as well. Like, Sean Payton has not gone out of his way to be effusive in praise or public commitment to Russell Wilson at any time since he has gotten this job. And I don't know if that's a put on. I don't know if that's a motivational ploy, or if that's just the God's honest truth for Sean Payton of, I don't know about this guy and let's see. Okay? That's what I'm curious to find out about is Russ going to stick to being the good soldier, and is Sean Payton going to stick to seeing it through as far as he possibly can with Russell Wilson, or is this a one-year marriage that is just going to blow up and fall apart? To me, that's the story of this season for the Broncos.
Yeah, it really is, because Sean Payton's going to be here. He signed a 5-year contract with the Broncos. This ownership group views him as sort of this long-term play at stability, right? This guy that is going to bring in a culture that's proven to win in the past, that's proven to be consistent, which I think is the thing that's been missing, obviously, amid all this roster turnover, coaching turnover, front office turnover. That is the thing that they have tried to accomplish with the hiring of Sean Payton. Russell Wilson is probably the next most important part of that whole thing, because, again, let's remember March 2022, 5 draft picks, 3 players, a couple months later, 5-year, $245 million contract. There's not much more you could invest in an effort to bring in a franchise quarterback and have that guy be sort of the answer to a long-term problem. And in 2022, Russell Wilson was anything but those things. And so, like, it's such a dynamic of like what they need him to be versus maybe now what is realistic. And that, to your point about Sean Payton not going all out in his praise for Russell Wilson, which is a stark departure from what we saw last training camp. It was the hype train, run amok, run into the wall, run over the mountain, however you want to say it. I think some of it is a concerted effort to avoid that in every way. Sean Payton has not hid his sort of like disdain, might be a strong word, but just really like turning his nose up at how he saw the operation go last year. And I think so much of that was sort of this like, kind of red carpet for Wilson, because in his mind, Sean Payton, 15-year coach, Super Bowl champion, mega winner, like he's the one that should be in charge and setting that whole foundation and having it revolve around how he does things. And so it's for him, Russell Wilson better get on board. Like there's no wiggle room there in my mind of what Sean Payton wants out of him. And Russell Wilson, to your point, he has to show, with the way that he follows like the offense, with the way that he takes coaching, all those sorts of things, he has to show what matches his words about really learning from Payton and thinking he's a genius. If you think he's a genius, just go all in, be completely on board, be a completely malleable player, even at 34 years old with 11 years of experience. That's just what he's got to be in my mind.
You know, I think back to Russ in Seattle, okay, and the greatest point of tension that existed between that defense and Russ and the coaching staff was the sense that Pete Carroll acquiesced to anything that Russ wanted, that Pete Carroll held his hand, that Pete Carroll had a different set of standards for Russ than he did for other guys, that Pete Carroll coached the entire roster hard except for Russell Wilson. And that ultimately was a source of tension. Now, eventually, did Russ take it too far? Did he make too many pushes in terms of demands? And was that ultimately what got him shipped out of town? Well, plenty of long-form pieces that I read in places like The Athletic last year would suggest that certainly was the case. But again, this was the sense of it was easier on Russ. We watched it with Hackett last year. I mean, it's not humanly possible for anything to have been easier than what it was between Russ and Hackett last year. Now that Sean is here, Payton's job is to, like you said, coach him hard and have Russ take the coaching, and the lack of public commitment suggests a situation where Russell Wilson is adapting to something he's never had before in his pro football career. And, Sean Payton can be as overbearing as any coach in football. How is all that going to go? To your point, maybe it goes great. Maybe this is exactly what Russell Wilson has been thirsting for, has needed, and maybe last year's gigantic helping of humble pie got Russ to the place where he will just simply take that coaching and this will all work magnificently. That'd be awesome. We would all enjoy watching the Broncos score more than 16 points a game. I think we would all like that, but I don't know if it gets there. I just flat out do not know if it does. Here's the thing. I know it has to.
Yeah.
It has to. It's the only way it works.
Yeah. And I think it's such a good point about the humble portion of it. Like the benefit I think for Sean Payton is that Russell Wilson's confidence, how he felt internally, I think was a lot different last year than what he would ever publicly say. Sure. To me, as much as anything else, we know he had some injuries that he dealt with. We know his offensive line was injured and inefficient. We know that the coaching staff was way over its skis. All those things were true. But I think there was a real tangible loss of confidence in Russell Wilson, which is probably was a new thing, right? So much I think of the push and pull that existed in Seattle could exist because they were so successful, right? And it became this matter of who deserves the credit for this, or who's not being allowed to shine the most in this era of success. Well, Russell Wilson doesn't have that success in Denver to stand on. And so for Sean Payton, who's coming in fresh as again, the winner guy, the guy that won 4 division titles, even at the end of his tenure, toward the end of his tenure in New Orleans, just a winner, comes in with that sort of fresh blank sheet, whereas Russell Wilson is coming off the worst season of his career. I think that's an advantageous position for Sean Payton to be in, because it's look, what you had last year did not work. We have to completely overhaul things. And the only way it's going to work is if you buy in. And so I think that's hopefully, if you're a Broncos fan, that's what you're getting from Russell Wilson. But to your point, we have to see it. We could talk as long as we want about what it needs to look like, but it's a matter of how he takes that and how quickly that's the other part of this. This offense is complicated. It's everybody you talk to say, it doesn't really start rolling until year 2, year 3. And Russell Wilson's on his 3rd straight new offense. So that's going to be, I think, another component of it, of how much can they add in this training camp versus what they ultimately want to get to. That is another component of it.
Think back to last year, whether it was maybe the Raider game, at home where they lose an OT, maybe it's, the Indy game, that abomination.
Pick one of it out of a tree.
Exactly. Like standing there and listening to Russell Wilson after a game and being like, this guy's shaking. Like this guy is not feeling himself right now. It's happened. And, the stupid signifier that we were all searching for, but sadly he made it a thing, was, well, did he say Broncos country, let's ride at the end of the, of his press availability, whatever it is. Here's the good news. Okay. The week 17 and 18 of the Chiefs and the Chargers, and they scored 29 points a game in those two games. Rosberg stepped in for Hackett. They got Russ into some better situations. He showed a little bit of desperation and physicality and some want to play well. And look, was he great in those games? God, no. But he was better than he had been. Like, imagine if Hackett doesn't get fired after Christmas, if he finishes the year and they're that bad those last two games, I don't know what version of Russell Wilson shows up to training camp. In the very least, and again, it wasn't great, but in the very least, he at least has that to be able to look back on and say, okay, like, I haven't totally lost everything. I still have some ability, and if I'm coached competently, things can be okay.
Yeah, and you hope that they take some of the good stuff too, like that this coaching staff, which I think is obviously smart enough to kind of pick from trees that have good fruit and put that all together. Like, in those two games, we saw a much more concerted, heavy personnel running attack that I think, allowed Russell Wilson to actually breathe, allowed things to not be so complicated at the line of scrimmage. The other thing was featuring Jerry Jeudy as your clear best offensive player, which is what he is right now. Could Javonte Williams be that guy once he gets healthy? Perhaps. But right now, Jerry Jeudy is the best offensive player on this football team. And you have to feature that player, not as like a happenstance, maybe he gets open. It's designing ways for him to get the ball in his hands in the open field, which Sean Payton has shown an ability time and time again to get guys into those spots. Like, those are the things that I hope that they carry over, just as somebody that would like, to your point, to see this team score points more efficiently. Those are the kind of things that you hope they take into 2023. My last question to kind of wrap up, Russ, is like, we mentioned what they gave up in March of 2022 to get him. And if this just all ended right now, it would go down as one of the worst trades in NFL history. What, in your mind, like, because I think this thought that Russell Wilson could be a top 5 quarterback, which was maybe some of the hope, top 5, 7 guy when they acquired him, I think that's largely out the window. To me, I think I've said, if you can be a top 12 to 14, guy in QBR, passer rating, whatever metric you want to use, and you're winning games and you're being efficient, you're not turning it over, like, that's not really what you signed up for. But to me, that's sort of where he needs to get to as a next step. What can this still be a trade where you look back and say the Broncos won this, or is the bridge already too far for him to have to climb again?
That part feels unlikely. The win the trade part feels unlikely. The package that they gave up was for a top 5 quarterback. I don't think he's got that. I don't think that that's left in him. Quite frankly, maybe that never was him. Is maybe something that we learned a little bit post trade and watching him in a Broncos uniform. But this is a guy he's going to turn 35 this season. The decline is real. That's all been happening directly in front of us. Yeah, I said this on my show. The ceiling is average. Okay, if he could just be an average NFL quarterback, like, I think last year it was passer rating and QBR 27th and 28th respectively.
Yes,
if I got that right.
Yeah,
that's 5 and 12 stuff right there. Like, yeah.
And there's some other advanced metrics out there, like on a per snap basis, where he was even lower than that, like only above guys like Zach Wilson and Baker Mayfield. So
he was that bad. He really was that bad of a player last year. And some of the issues that he was having last year, hanging on to the ball, slow decision making, those sorts of things, like, those don't automatically get fixed playing in Sean Payton's offense, and those don't automatically, get fixed with him being in this system like that. Those are real problems, and those have long been problems for Russell Wilson. He was sacked 55 times last year. Now, let's hope that the upgrades on the offensive line stick, certainly, but this dude's got to help himself out a little bit, okay? He's supposed to be slimmer, which is supposed to help him move better, that whole thing. Like, okay, I always love, coming into training camp, Nick, the oh man, slimmed down,
Best
really,
shape of my life.
really taking great care of himself, slimmed down, going to be more mobile, all those things. Bulked up this off season, never been lifting harder, never felt stronger, going to be able to take the pounding, all that kind of stuff. Like it again, this is where I get to training camp stuff and roll my eyes at this whole thing, okay? But also, like, all right, you're going to have to move, my guy. You're going to have to be able to get on the move and protect yourself out there because he's not a quick decision maker. We know that he's got issues with being able to see over the middle. All those problems with Russell Wilson, Sean Payton doesn't magically fix all of those. But again, mastery of the offense, better route trees, better route combinations, taking advantage of actually healthy skill position players, and hopefully a mildly improved offensive line all adds up to an average NFL quarterback, which I think the Broncos, they can make a run at a wild card spot if they have an average quarterback this year.
Yeah, and I think that's so much a part of just like setting this foundation. I think this idea that Russell Wilson was going to be a 5-year answer that's putting you in the playoffs every single year and is going to be a top 10 quarterback. Like, I agree. I think that's gone. I still do think that he can be an effective quarterback for this team. Because, to your point, I still go back to this quote from February when Sean Payton came in at his introductory press conference and said, we want to take Russell Wilson off the high dive. And I think that was an immediate recognition of just kind of how much that he was asked to do at a point in his career where he probably shouldn't have been. And a lot of that was, again, we talked about a lot of it was circumstance with his own injuries to others, losing guys like Tim Patrick right away, Javonte Williams right away. Like, we can be fair that there was a lot of things stacked against him. The coaching staff that just didn't seem to have consistent answers, was changing things all the time. Those were all issues that he had to deal with. And so I think some of that high dive removal will be, somewhat basic, right? A lot more cogent plan to run the football, better play along the offensive line and a better plan along the offensive line of how to protect him. But again, this is a guy that gets sacked all the time, regardless of the season. That's been an issue for him a lot in his career. It's sort of antithetical to the things that Sean Payton wants to do in his offense. He's going to grit his teeth on a lot of these because it just he has always had it designed to have a low sack rate in his offense. It's important to what they want to do. Nobody wants to get sacked, but it's critical to what they're trying to do. So I just think that there's a lot of things that could come to a head. But again, it's a better foundation. And to me, it's just how far Russell Wilson himself can leap off of that. So that's, again, we could spend this whole, podcast talking about Russell Wilson, but I want to hit on a few other things. What interests you, I think, specifically about this defense, right? Because for so long, the Broncos, during this 7-year run of not making the playoffs, the defense has been good to close to great, for a lot of that time, average at the worst, basically, during this stretch. Last year, they were really good the first half of the season. And then as the pass rush disappeared in the second half and, some of these games got away from them, their metrics dipped quite a bit, but still on paper should be a strong defense with a lot of returning veterans. What's just sort of, what are the things you're most interested from a big picture perspective about the defensive side of the ball?
Do they have a good pass rush? That's my biggest question, because I think the secondary is good. Like it's secondary and inside linebackers. Like that's two strengths. That probably is the two strengths of the team right now, at least roster wise. So do they have a pass rush? Is Randy Gregory healthy? What does Frank Clark have left in the tank? Randy Gregory, and I knew this, but also I just pulled up his Pro Football Reference page the other day, just looked at it. Dude's never had more than 6 sacks in a year. You know, we're always amazed. Why does Jadeveon Clowney keep getting contracts? This guy's never had double-digit sacks. Randy Gregory got $70 million, and he's never had more than 6 sacks in a season. He looked impactful when he was on the field last year, but he didn't stay on the field. He's got to be a star. He has to be a Pro Bowl level player if they're going to be a really good defense. Because after that, aging Frank Clark, Baron Browning, who's going to start the year banged up, Nick Benito, who, hopefully there's a big leap from year 1 to year 2 out of him. But do they have a pass rush? the defensive line in terms of the front three is an interesting group. Purcell's he's on the non-football injury list, by the way. And I'll just ask you. I know it's your podcast, but you're the reporter. What's wrong with Mike Purcell?
Yeah, he had I think an off-season kind of a knee scope that kept him out of the off-season program. And so I think why he's on the non-football injury list is because it was something that happened off-season, wasn't related to an injury that he suffered last season. So had Javonte Williams needed to go on it would be the physically unable to perform list because it was an injury that occurred.
A football in-season injury.
A football in-season injury. And I think with Baron Browning, it was a surgery to fix an injury that occurred during last season. So I think that's where the designation is. But the thing I know that during training camp, before the roster cut downs, those guys can come back at any time. But yeah, that to me is I agree with you 100%. Like that's what they have to do. They have to be able to show that they can get after the passer. Now I do think it's interesting that they're bringing in Vance Joseph is a guy who blitzes as aggressively as anybody else, any defensive play caller in the league, to an almost comical extent last year. But a lot of that was by design. And our producer, my brother Matt, is a Cardinals fan, so he kind of knew some of that pain last year. But it's a situation to me where I think that stuff can be really advantageous, especially when you talk about some of the guys that they have. What's been really interesting to me is Sean Payton talks a lot about this pressure player designation, right? Like not necessarily viewing it as, okay, these are the outside linebackers that need to create, counting stats from a pass rushing perspective. Like they view that as, how do we get a guy like Drew Sanders, who's going to play inside linebacker, but can be a terror off the edge? How do we get him involved in this overall pass rushing picture? Even a guy like Caden Stearns, who was a pretty successful blitzer during his rookie season, how do they get him involved? So like part of it to me is like, how much can Vance Joseph manufacture some of that? But you also don't want to live in a world in which you're constantly having to blitz because you have no front four pressure, because then that puts the squeeze on everybody else. To me, it's going to be a concern until it's not. Part of Randy Gregory was really impactful in those first 3 games last year before hurting his knee against the Raiders. But he also had a healthy Bradley Chubb on the other side, who we, as we remember, was playing really well for most of the first half of last season before he got traded. It's why they got a first-round pick for him. They don't have that now. Like Baron Browning was going to be your next guy. He may or may not be ready for the start of the season. So now you're talking, again, to your point, Frank Clark, who shows up in the playoffs, but his regular season production, hasn't quite been there the last 2 or 3 years. Nick Bonito, again, a guy that they were high on, but didn't show a lot as a rookie. That's kind of normal for that position. But again, how much of a leap is he going to take? Jonathan Cooper's a nice player, but he's not a guy that you game plan for, and he scares you. So yeah, to me, that's a big question mark. I wonder whether Drew Sanders, if they eventually just say, this guy's an edge player, we need to get him out there. That's a curious one for me.
It's an interesting thought, man. Look, Surtain is, top 3 at his position, maybe the best at his position in the game. Justin Simmons, top 3 at his position in the game. Kareem Jackson played a ton last year, and now he's back. Caden Stearns, next step right there. I like the corner depth that they've got. Their secondary is awesome. It's just, okay, can you marry that now with even just a decent enough pass rush? I think you could add that up to, being a top 10 DVOA kind of defense in the NFL, which the Broncos, they 100% have to be able to be for them to be good. And then, if they could score, 18, 19 points a game. Then we could really have something going on right here. But to me, again, it just comes down to Randy Gregory, man. Are you ever going to get what you paid for?
Yeah, that's going to be that's their pathway to the playoffs, right? Is that they need to be, I think, a top 10, efficiency defense, be really good in the red zone, and marry that with an offense like we spent time talking about that needs to get to that, at least be 20th in the league, right? Like they've not been better than 26th in scoring since 2014, I believe. Yeah. So we're talking about almost a decade in which you haven't even cracked the top 20 of offense. That has to be that. I mean, that just has to be the baseline to be a top 20 offense. You have 9-time Pro Bowl quarterback Russell Wilson, you have Super Bowl champion and offensive innovator Sean Payton. If that can't be you have all these wide receivers that, everybody apparently wants, but you don't want to trade them. Like, that group has to be a top 20 offense.
Going back to the beginning of our conversation of what are you looking for in training camp, I swear to God, man, every single year since Peyton Manning has departed, and this is where I'll be a complete hypocrite and talk out of both sides of my mouth. The first week of training camp, I'm supposed to be like waiting to see some progression. And instead, I just do the same thing every year where I'm just like, oh, this offense stinks. Oh, this is terrible. They're going to be so bad again. Every year. Like that. I would like to see a semi-competent looking offense early on. That would just be, it'd be a nice change of pace.
Yeah, just give us something a little bit different to look at, to talk about, to write about, to
I'm telling you, man, though, like I've seen it like from the first week where you're just like, what are they doing? This is awful. Oh my God.
And we tend to try to talk ourselves into circles about like,
right.
You try to talk yourself into it. Right. And I think going back with the, benefit of hindsight, like some of the stuff that even occurred in training camp last year, with Wilson in the offense, it was like, ooh, this doesn't look so great. And then they came out in week one in the first 3 quarters of that game and were like doing whatever they wanted. And that turned out to be, that was sort of the pinnacle of what they were going to do offensively all year. But yeah, there were just those signs. And so that's what you hope for is like, okay, approach this with an open mind that this offense is going to be different, but also if it's not, don't try to paint it in a different way. Now, I do think that you're going to have this thing of, I think Sean Payton's going to be willing to live with some of these growing pains because his offense is complicated. You're introducing a lot of players to it for the first time. As much as he has said that signing a lot of these former Saints players isn't about like culture, I don't necessarily think it's about culture, but I do think it's about like, I need X amount of guys on this team that just sort of, because he's plucked them into each room, right? There's a receiver here, a tight end here, a running back here, an offensive, like it just guys from every part of the team to where it's just like, okay, this is how we do things. I think that is probably more of a concerted effort than he might let on because there is going to be some of that. Again, it's another new offense and a guy that expects a lot. So it's not necessarily that the offense I think needs to be like humming right away, but it also can't just look like, to your point, what the hell are we doing?
It's so hard too because going to camp every day in the Manning years, it was 2015 was weird because Kubiak and Peyton hated the offense and there was all that tension. But like those first 3 years when Manning was there, and even the first year when he was like coming off the neck surgery,
yeah.
It was just like, holy crap. Look at how good this is.
Oh, I know. I mean, but that before that 2013 year, like, that 2013 year, like, you just know that they're going to score 35 points every week at a minimum. Mm-hmm. And like, you just saw that, like, they dominated practice every single day. Like, it was just already there. So I do think, like, to your point, like, the micro breakdowns can just get obnoxious, and it's going to be hot and it's just going to be too much. But I do think it'll give us a pretty good window, at least by, kind of the second week of August of like, all right, maybe they got something cooking or this might be another bumpy ride. Yeah, we shall see. Nate, before I get you out of here, man, any last prevailing thoughts about camp or what you are excited to see, what you're not excited to see?
We got a kicker battle this year, Nick.
And we have a kicker battle.
I love kicking. It's funny. Last week I was I went to Vegas for Mountain West Football Media Day, and Nevada brought their kicker, Brandon Talton, who 2 years ago hit a 56-yard game winner in his first game ever as a walk-on against Purdue, which is pretty baller.
Yeah.
And, he's been all conference a couple of times, and so they brought him out to Media Day, right? And it's so funny because every other reporter in the place is like, what the hell's the kicker doing here? And I had a 5-minute allotted window to talk to him, and he sat down with me, and I talked to him for 18 minutes. I was like, we were talking about holding. We were talking about shoes. Like,
this is my jam.
I love kicker nuance, man. I love kicker minutia. I love specialists. I think they're fascinating. And I think that Sean Payton's decision to jettison Brandon McManus was weird as hell. And I want to see if it works out. I get what he was trying to do in freeing up money, but man, you don't spit in the face of a reliable kicker. And he did so with Brandon McManus being out of here. So the Maher v. Fry battle is massive. And if the Broncos miss a big fourth quarter kick early on in the season, at any point in the season, we're just going to look at it going, what the heck were you doing?
Can you imagine
with
that, right?
move?
Like
So-
they get everything else put together, right? And they
Yeah.
finally look competent, and then they're missing kicks. You have
and
to
then they're
make.
missing kicks. Hopefully that's not the case. But God, man, Brett Maher, that's the solution, right? I don't think that's the last of it either. Like Elliott Fry and Brett Maher, they very well may not be the last two kickers that we hear from this very season. So again, like everybody jokes like, hey, kicker battle. No, that's a really big thing, and it's going to determine whether or not they win or lose games. Like simple results will come down to the kicker battle. So it's a thing, and I love kicker battles, kicker talk, and I'm going to be a big participant in all of it.
I'm excited. You know, it's crazy. I did not realize until I looked up his page today that Brett Maher played in the CFL for like a million years. He's also one of, if not the only, he's one of only two guys that have kicked 3 field goals of at least 62 yards. So he's got a big leg. And last year he made 29 of his 32 regular season field goal attempts, 50 of his 53 PATs in the regular season. But man, it's just like people who are like, oh yeah, he's a great kicker. Like you will just completely forget about this, like 1 of 5 point afters in the wild card game. You know, and granted they didn't need, like it was a game in which they were dominating and whatever, you know, and then he turns around and he makes 2 field goals against the 49ers, but I think they had an extra point that got, like, the snap got fumbled or something else happened there
early on in that game.
Yeah, but it's just like, I mean, can you recover from the yips? I mean, do we see that right away? Can you not know until a playoff type pressure comes? Like it's all interesting.
It's a thing. It's a thing, man. I'm looking at it.
All right.
You asked me what I'm looking for. There's your answer.
All right, Nate. Well, I'll catch you. We'll catch you Friday. We'll be watching kickers. Don't know where we'll stand while we're watching it. You know, maybe we will be jettisoned to a corner on the hill where we need to build a homemade, you know, selfie stick to put something on top of. I don't know what it's going to look like.
Bring my periscope.
We'll be there come hell or high water, man. Appreciate having you, man. Being my first guest on the Not Another Bucking podcast. I really appreciate your time, dude.
It was an honor. Thank you, Nick.
All right.
Great language, great vision, great belief. Stay on schedule. That's all we got to do. That's it.
And there you have it. Episode 1 of Not Another Bucking podcast in the books. Really hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. And again, this is going to be something that continues to grow, continues to evolve. We'll bring in a wider range of guests. We'll have different topics, different segments. Really just kind of want to grow with this thing and have you guys be a part of that growth. So again, we ask you subscribe to the podcast so it can be in your feed every week, and follow the YouTube channel as well and subscribe there. And until next time, thanks for watching.